In this video, we will tell you what happened to Jennifer Holland. Jennifer Holland was born on February 23, 1988 in a small American village called Wimberley, Texas. She had loving parents, a sister named Diana, and a carefree, calm childhood. Soon her family moved to a city called Braer, located about 200 kilometers from her home village. After finishing school, the girl entered a local college called Blinn, where she planned to study to become a paralegal. She planned to connect her future life with jurisprudence. She had many friends who described her as a kind, hard-working, friendly girl. She always had a positive outlook on life and was excited about her future career. Jenna settled near her college, renting an apartment in a residential complex called Autumn Woods. She also took a job as a waitress at a local restaurant to help cover housing costs and not have to depend on her parents financially. Despite her busy schedule, in which she had to combine school and work, Jenna often spent time with her boyfriend Spencer Pud. They had been dating since school, but lived separately even after Jenna moved into a rented apartment. Their relationship lasted for several years, although the couple quarreled from time to time. On April 8, 2008, Jenna, who was 20 years old at the time, finished her shift and went home at approximately 9 p.m. Since Spencer attended the same college with her and lived nearby, Jenna invited him to her place. They helped each other with their studies, sorting out the homework assigned to them. Around midnight, Spencer said goodbye to Jenna and went home. About half an hour later, they talked briefly on the phone, after which they wished each other good night and went to bed. On the morning of April 9, Spencer discovered that he had forgotten the textbook he needed for the lecture at Jenny's. At about 12:30 p.m., he came to her house to pick it up. No one answered the knock on the door, and then Spencer was surprised to find that it was unlocked. Thinking that Jenna was still sleeping, he walked through the apartment and headed to her bedroom. However, a terrible sight awaited him there. The girl was lying on the floor without signs of life. Realizing she was dead, Spencer immediately rushed to a nearby apartment and asked the residents to call the police. The recording of the call is publicly available. Jenna's neighbor tells the operator that the girl is lying on the floor and not breathing. Spencer's shocked voice can be heard in the background. The police who arrived at the crime scene examined the apartment and found no signs of forced entry. The only strange thing was that the window in the second bedroom was open. Detectives immediately assumed that the killer could have entered the premises through him. But this version was called into question due to the unlocked door. Investigators immediately cast doubt on the version of a possible robbery, as a result of which the criminal could attack Jenna. All things were in their places. Nothing valuable was missing. At the same time, her purse with money and credit cards hung right at the front door. A robber would definitely take its contents. Moreover, the apartment was in absolute order. There were no signs of a struggle. At first glance, there was no evidence to indicate the recent presence of the killer. After examining Jenna's body, the police did not notice any serious injuries, with the exception of a bruise on her forehead and a bitten lip. She was lying on her back, fully dressed. The position of her body looked quite natural. Small drops of blood were visible on the collar of her shirt and on the carpet next to her body. After examining the girl's body, medical experts made several important conclusions. First, death occurred approximately 10 hours before Spencer found Jenna. It turns out she was killed just an hour after she finished talking to the guy on the phone. Secondly, signs of strangulation were found on her body, which was the cause of death. Experts also determined that the unknown perpetrator did not subject the girl to violence. However, Jenny tried to fight him off, as evidenced by traces of skin and blood under her nails. All of these samples were immediately sent to the laboratory to try to extract the culprit's DNA sample from them. Of course, the first suspect was her boyfriend Spencer. There were several reasons for this. Firstly, according to statistics, the killer is quite often someone close to you. Secondly, the absence of signs of a break-in indicated that Jenna could know the criminal and voluntarily let him into the apartment. During interrogation, Spencer cooperated with the investigation and answered all questions. At that time, the expert had not yet been able to extract a killer DNA sample. Therefore, the police could not verify the guy's involvement in the murder in this and that way. As a result, he was released, but the investigators were in no hurry to remove suspicions from him. At the same time, Jenny's friends said that he valued her very much and would hardly have been able to harm his beloved. Detectives then began searching for possible witnesses. Police interviewed Jenna's neighbors to see if they had noticed anything suspicious the night of the murder. They soon managed to find several guys who were playing volleyball near Jenna's apartment complex during that period of time. They said that they saw a strange guy who came out of the building from the side of the girl's apartment. They were surprised by the fact that this man was naked to the waist. Witnesses added that the guy looked like 26-year-old Sean Stevens, who lives in the same apartment complex. Upon learning of this, Jenna's friends told the police one alarming fact. Some time ago, Stevens, who lived directly across from Jenna, shouted insults at her from his window. It is not entirely clear what caused this behavior, but for the police all these factors were already enough to suspect the young man. Stevens was found and brought in for questioning. He claimed that he knew nothing about this murder, and that night he did not leave his apartment complex, much less walk down the street without clothes. The police had no confirmation of these words, but without serious evidence he also had to be released. Among other things, detectives studied the possible connection of this murder with Jenna's place of work. However, the testimony of her colleagues from the restaurant and the surveillance camera showed that on the day of her death the girl did not conflict with anyone, and such situations had not arisen before. From this point on, the investigation slowed down. The police continued to look for new leads and question Jenna's relatives and friends, and at some point they managed to get a new tip. During another conversation with investigators, the girl's parents were able to recall important information that could potentially point to another suspect. 2 months before the murder, Jenna complained to relatives about the maintenance worker who was doing maintenance in the building of her apartment complex. One day, coming out of the shower in only a towel, the girl discovered a stranger in her living room. When she asked him what he was doing in her apartment, he replied that he thought no one was home. The man claimed that he did not hear the shower running and stayed to check the condition of the apartment and make sure that nothing needed repair. Of course, Jenna was shocked by this situation. She discovered the man was 29-year-old Jeremy Rosser and reported the incident to the building manager. The police conducted a small experiment. One person stood at the front door while the other turned on the shower. The sound of running water could be heard very clearly in the living room and even next to the front door. In such a situation, it was extremely unlikely that Rosser did not hear him and thought that no one was home. After talking with the manager, the police found out that Rosser stopped going to work a few days after Jenna's murder. This was the reason for his dismissal. It all looked very suspicious, and detectives tried to find the man. But one problem awaited them here. Rosser had moved out of his apartment, and they were unable to determine his current location. The police could only find out that he had an ex-wife and 2 children. Thus, there were 3 main suspects in this complicated case: Spencer Pood, Sean Stevens, and Jeremy Rosser. In order to find out whether one of them was the killer, it was necessary to wait for the results from the laboratory, where experts were trying to extract a DNA sample. They worked to study particles under the girl's fingernails and drops of blood on her shirt and carpet. As a result, they were able to find out that one of the drops of blood on the carpet contained genetic material that did not belong to Jenny. This sample matched the one that was extracted from the particles under the girl's fingernails. Ultimately, experts were finally able to extract a full DNA sample. The first thing they did was put him into the FBI database, but there were no matches. This means that the killer has not previously been prosecuted under serious charges. Despite this, police were now able to match the sample obtained with DNA samples from the 3 main suspects, The only problem was that their samples were not taken during the first interrogations. Detectives tried to contact them, and something surprising awaited them. It turned out that all three had left the city, and their current location was unknown. The police immediately began searching. In the meantime, investigators decided not to sit idle and use a DNA sample from the killer. They began voluntarily collecting DNA samples from men who lived in the same complex as Jenner and also worked at her restaurant. In total, they were able to obtain 50 DNA samples, but none of them matched the one found at the murder scene. Meanwhile, the police finally managed to find Spencer. It turned out that he was 3 hours away from BRY at his parents' house. The guy said that he couldn't cope with Jenna's death and decided to spend time with his family in order to somehow take his mind off this tragedy. He voluntarily provided his DNA sample, which was immediately sent to the laboratory. The guy also allowed the expert to examine his body for scratches that would definitely be on the killer, because pieces of his skin were found under Jenna's nails. Following this, the police were able to establish the location of Stevens. It turned out that he also went to his parents, who lived 720 kilometers from Blinn College. He explained that his brother, who had served in the army, had finally returned from Iraq, and he wanted to see him. Stevens voluntarily provided his DNA sample, which was also sent to the laboratory. While the police were waiting for results from the laboratory, they had to find the last suspect. This turned out to be much more difficult. Police were able to contact Rosser's ex-wife, who shared some disturbing facts. According to her, when their marriage was already close to divorce, Rosser behaved quite aggressively towards her. A man raised his hand to her, threw her to the ground, and tried to strangle her. In addition, he often caused scandals. As a result, it became simply impossible to live with him, and the marriage ended in divorce. All this happened right around the same time that Jenna was killed. It was thanks to his ex-wife that the police managed to find Rosser. This happened in early October, 7 months after the murder. During interrogation, he behaved quite calmly, answered all the detectives' questions. In addition, the man has not had a single arrest in his life. He denied any involvement in the murder and voluntarily provided his DNA sample. The police also examined his car, and there they found some very interesting findings. A laptop was found in the car, whose serial number was listed in the theft report. A few months before Jenna's murder, her neighbor contacted the police after a laptop disappeared from her apartment. But that wasn't the creepiest thing. Police also found Rosser's keys to several apartments in the apartment complex where he worked. Considering that he was fired a week after Jenna's murder, Rosser had no right to keep these keys, and the manager was obliged to confiscate them. All this indicated that the man was engaged in petty thefts. But could he move on to cold-blooded murder? Meanwhile, experts from the laboratory tested all 3 DNA samples. It turned out that Jenna's boyfriend and her neighbor had nothing to do with the murder. But Rosser's DNA sample completely matched the sample found under the victim's fingernails. Having received the results, the police immediately arrested Rosser, but as despite the coincidence of the DNA samples, he continued to insist on his innocence. Of course, this didn't help him at all, and the man was charged with Jenna's murder. Since Rosser was not eager to reveal the details of that night, investigators put forward their version of what happened. Apparently, Rosser entered Jenna's apartment with the intention of committing a robbery, using the key to her door. This could have happened in the evening before 9 o'clock, when the girl had not yet returned home from work. Perhaps Rosser did not have time to complete his plan, because Jenna came home with her boyfriend, and the criminal had to hide in the second bedroom, where he waited for Spencer to leave. It is possible that it was Rosser who opened the window in the hope that he could quietly leave the apartment through it, but it didn't work out for him. After waiting for Spencer to leave and hearing Jenna wish him good night on the phone, Rosser could finally try to leave the apartment through the front door. There are 2 possible scenarios for what happened next. Or he tried to leave the apartment, but Jenna noticed him, and Rosser, in a panic, attacked her. or he deliberately went to her room, planning to commit murder. The police even assumed that he killed the girl because she looked like his ex-wife. Considering that the man refused to admit his guilt, the case was sent to court. The wait for the trial to begin dragged on for months, as is often the case in state court systems. But just 2 weeks before the trial began, something unexpected happened. In December 2009, more than a year after his arrest, Rosser finally admitted his guilt. He entered into a court agreement with prosecutors in hopes of reducing his sentence. The men also asked the investigation not to involve his family in the trial. These included his parents and the 2 children he had with his ex-wife. Thanks to this, the trial was completed in the shortest possible time. If he had not confessed, the trial could well have dragged on for several years. Despite the DNA match, Rosser was sentenced to 55 years in prison. In addition, he received 5 years in prison on charges of stealing a laptop. The assistant district attorney said that in his memory, this is the maximum sentence in a case where the offender admits his guilt. However, Rosser had a much more serious risk: the death penalty. If the investigation had been able to prove that the murder was premeditated and pre-planned, Rosser could well have received exactly this sentence. The man was taken to the Rosserona, Texas jail. He will not be able to apply for parole until 2036. Considering that Rosser was 27 years old at the time of the crime, he can be released early at 55 years old. If he serves the full term in prison, he will be released only at 82 years old. During the trial, he refused to look Jenna's relatives and friends in the eyes. He was led into the hall wearing an orange prison jumpsuit and handcuffed. The man only nodded to his parents in greeting when he saw them in the hall. Otherwise, almost all the time, he was silent and did not react to anything, keeping his head down. The family of the murdered man had the right to speak out in court by appealing directly to the killer. All 3 took advantage of this opportunity. The girl's sister Diana stood at the trial 60 centimeters from the criminal. She said she hoped Rosser would still realize what a terrible thing he had done. She promised to pray for him, and she believed she could one day forgive her sister's killer. Jenna's mother expressed doubts that Rosser regrets what he did. She made the killer look her straight in the eye and told her with firm certainty that he would never be able to fully understand the horror he had brought upon their family. Jenna's father did not plan to speak at the trial, but at the last minute he changed his mind. He promised to come to any prison where Rosser was placed and tell everyone what a monster he was. He also expressed a willingness to attend a hearing in 27 years when Rosser asks for parole. In addition, Jenna's parents filed a lawsuit against the owners of the apartment complex. They were confident that their daughter's words were not taken seriously when she complained to Rosser's boss about his behavior. In addition, Rosser's keys were not confiscated after his dismissal, which indicates the manager's negligence. Jenna's parents believed that their daughter would still be alive if her complaints had been listened to and attention had been paid to Rosser's unacceptable behavior. The only thing that remains unclear to this day is Rosser's exact motive. Despite the fact that the man admitted to the murder, he refused to reveal the reasons for his crime. In any case, this no longer plays a special role. His guilt is obvious, and he deserves to spend most of his life in prison.